October 7, 2023 dawned like any other day in Israel. Citizens went about their routines, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. As the sun rose higher, a chilling scene unfolded. Hamas, the militant group controlling Gaza, launched a surprise attack, shattering the fragile peace. Thousands of rockets rained down on Israeli towns and cities, sowing chaos and fear. Air raid sirens wailed, sending people scrambling for shelter. The scale of the attack was unprecedented, catching Israel off guard, but the horrors did not end there. Simultaneously, Hamas militants launched ground incursions into Israel, breaching the border fence. Armed with guns and explosives, they stormed into nearby communities, targeting civilians and soldiers alike. The images that emerged were shocking burning vehicles, terrified residents fleeing for their lives, and bodies lying in the streets. Adding to the horror, Hamas took numerous hostages, dragging them back into Gaza. Among them were women, children, and elderly civilians, their fate uncertain. The day's events sent shockwaves across Israel and the world, marking a terrifying escalation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The response from Israel was swift and fierce. Declaring war on Hamas, the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, launched Operation Iron Swords, aiming to cripple the militant group's capabilities and restore security. Airstrikes pounded Gaza, targeting Hamas military infrastructure, weapons depots, and command centers. The IDF mobilized ground troops, deploying them to the Gaza border and preparing for a potential ground invasion. Tanks, armored vehicles, and infantry units moved into position, their mission to neutralize Hamas fighters and secure Israeli communities near the Gaza Strip. As the days turned into nights, the skies above Gaza glowed with the fiery explosions of Israeli airstrikes. The sounds of war, explosions, gunfire, and wailing sirens became a terrifying soundtrack to daily life. Israel vowed to dismantle Hamas's military infrastructure and deter future attacks. But the cost of retaliation was high. The intensity of the fighting resulted in significant casualties on both sides. While the IDF targeted Hamas militants and infrastructure, civilian casualties in Gaza mounted, raising concerns about the proportionality of Israel's response. The world watched with bated breath as the conflict escalated, fearing a wider regional war. News of the Hamas attack and Israel's subsequent retaliation sent shockwaves across the globe. The international community grappled with the escalating conflict, with reactions ranging from condemnation to calls for restraint. The United States, a staunch ally of Israel, expressed unwavering support for its right to defend itself. European nations condemned the Hamas attack, while also urging Israel to exercise proportionality in its response. The United Nations called for an immediate ceasefire and a return to dialogue, emphasizing the need to protect civilian lives. However, reaching a consensus on a path forward proved challenging. The conflict exposed the deep divisions within the international community regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Some nations placed the blame squarely on Hamas, labeling the group as a terrorist organization and supporting Israel's right to retaliate. Others criticized Israel's use of force, particularly the civilian casualties in Gaza, and called for a more balanced approach. The Arab world, too, was divided. While some countries condemned the Hamas attack, others expressed solidarity with the Palestinian people and criticized Israel's actions in Gaza. The conflict reignited long-standing tensions and underscored the complexities of the Middle East's geopolitical landscape. As the fighting raged on, a humanitarian crisis unfolded in Gaza. The densely populated enclave, already grappling with poverty and limited resources, bore the brunt of the conflict. Israel's blockade, in place for over a decade, tightened its grip, restricting the flow of essential goods, including food, water, and medical supplies. Hospitals in Gaza, overwhelmed with casualties, faced critical shortages of medicine, equipment, and trained medical personnel. Power outages became more frequent, disrupting essential services and plunging homes into darkness. The lack of clean water and sanitation facilities heightened the risk of disease outbreaks, further exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. International aid organizations struggled to deliver assistance to those in need, facing logistical challenges and security concerns. The United Nations warned of a looming catastrophe, urging all parties to allow humanitarian access to Gaza. As the fighting continued, the humanitarian situation deteriorated, leaving countless civilians trapped in a desperate struggle for survival. The plight of children in Gaza was particularly dire. Schools remained closed, depriving children of education and a sense of normalcy. Many children witnessed unimaginable horrors, losing loved ones, homes, and their sense of security. The psychological toll of the conflict on Gaza's children was immeasurable, casting a long shadow over their future. Amidst the devastation and despair, international efforts to broker a ceasefire intensified. Diplomats from various countries, including Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, engaged in shuttle diplomacy, trying to find common ground between Israel and Hamas. The goal was to halt the violence and pave the way for humanitarian aid to reach Gaza. However, negotiating a ceasefire proved to be a complex and arduous task. Israel demanded guarantees that Hamas would cease rocket fire and return all hostages before agreeing to a truce. Hamas, on the other hand, insisted on an end to the blockade and international pressure on Israel to address Palestinian grievances. Despite the challenges, a glimmer of hope emerged as both sides agreed to a ceasefire, mediated by Egypt. The ceasefire, though fragile, brought a much-needed respite from the violence. It allowed humanitarian aid to enter Gaza and provided a window of opportunity for further negotiations. However, the underlying issues that fueled the conflict remained unresolved. The ceasefire, while a positive step, was merely a pause in the fighting. Achieving a lasting peace required addressing the root causes of the conflict, including the status of Jerusalem, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, and the expansion of Israeli settlements. Section 6. The long road ahead, towards a lasting resolution. As the guns fell silent and the dust settled, the long and arduous task of rebuilding began. The physical damage in Gaza was extensive, with homes, infrastructure, and livelihoods destroyed. The psychological scars of the conflict ran deep, affecting generations to come. The road to recovery would be long and challenging, requiring international support and a commitment from all parties to work towards a lasting solution. However, the path to peace remained elusive. The fundamental issues that have fueled the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for decades, land, security, and identity, remained unresolved. The two-state solution, once seen as the most viable option for peace, seemed increasingly distant. The international community faced the daunting task of reviving the peace process and finding a way forward. The 2023 Gaza War served as a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict. Thousands of lives were lost, countless others were injured, and the social fabric of both societies was torn apart. The conflict left a legacy of pain, anger, and mistrust, making the pursuit of peace even more challenging. Yet, amidst the ruins, there remained a flicker of hope. The shared desire for peace among ordinary Israelis and Palestinians, weary of conflict and bloodshed, offered a glimmer of optimism. The international community, recognizing the urgency of the situation, renewed its commitment to finding a just and lasting solution. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but the pursuit of peace remained the only viable option. Section 7. Scars of war, trauma and loss on both sides. The 2023 Gaza war left an indelible mark on the lives of countless individuals, both Israeli and Palestinian. The physical scars of war, destroyed homes, shattered infrastructure, and lost livelihoods, were evident. However, it was the invisible wounds, the psychological trauma and emotional toll that ran deepest and would take years, if not generations, to heal. In Israel, the trauma of the Hamas attack and the constant fear of rocket fire had a profound impact on the population. Many Israelis, particularly those living near the Gaza border, suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. The conflict shattered their sense of security and left them grappling with the emotional aftermath. In Gaza, the psychological impact of the war was even more pronounced. The constant bombardment, the loss of loved ones, and the destruction of their homes and communities created a collective trauma that permeated every aspect of life. Children, in particular, were deeply affected, witnessing horrors no child should ever see. The trauma of war extended beyond the immediate victims to encompass entire communities. Families were torn apart, relationships were strained, and social cohesion was eroded. The psychological wounds of the conflict threatened to perpetuate the cycle of violence and undermine any prospects for peace and reconciliation. Addressing the psychological and emotional needs of those affected by the war became paramount. Providing mental health services, trauma counseling, and psychosocial support was crucial for healing and rebuilding shattered lives. However, the scale of the need often outstripped the available resources, highlighting the long-term challenges of post-conflict recovery. Section 8. Rebuilding Gaza, a monumental challenge. As the guns fell silent, the daunting task of rebuilding Gaza began. The scale of destruction was staggering. Homes were reduced to rubble, infrastructure was crippled, and the economy lay in ruins. Rebuilding Gaza would require a Herculean effort involving significant financial resources, technical expertise, and international cooperation. The international community pledged billions of dollars in aid to support Gaza's reconstruction. However, translating those pledges into tangible results proved to be a complex and challenging undertaking. The blockade imposed by Israel, while partially eased, continued to restrict the flow of essential goods and materials needed for reconstruction. Beyond the physical rebuilding, there was a pressing need to address the underlying factors that contributed to Gaza's vulnerability. The lack of economic opportunities, the chronic water and electricity shortages, and the restrictions on movement had created a cycle of poverty and despair that fueled resentment and instability. Rebuilding Gaza required a holistic approach that went beyond bricks and mortar. It demanded investing in education, healthcare, and job creation to empower the Palestinian people and provide them with hope for a better future. It also necessitated addressing the political and security concerns that led to the blockade and the ongoing conflict. The task of rebuilding Gaza was not merely a physical endeavor. It was an opportunity to rebuild trust, foster reconciliation, and create a more sustainable and prosperous future for all. It was a chance to break the cycle of violence and lay the foundation for a just and lasting peace. Section 9. The Future of Peace. Lessons from a year of conflict. A year after the devastating 2023 Gaza war, the quest for peace remained as elusive as ever. The conflict, like those that preceded it, served as a stark reminder of the intractable nature of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the urgent need for a new approach. The lessons learned from the war, however painful, offered valuable insights that could guide future peace efforts. Firstly, the conflict highlighted the dangers of complacency and the need for sustained international engagement. The peace process, stagnant for years, had allowed grievances to fester and mistrust to grow. Reviving the peace process would require a concerted and sustained effort, with the international community playing a proactive role in facilitating dialogue and mediating disputes. Secondly, the war underscored the importance of addressing the root causes of the conflict. Focusing solely on security measures and ceasefires, without addressing the underlying issues of occupation, settlements, and Palestinian self-determination, would only lead to further cycles of violence. A just and lasting peace required a comprehensive approach that tackled the core issues at the heart of the conflict. Thirdly, the conflict emphasized the need for inclusive dialogue and reconciliation. Excluding key stakeholders, particularly Hamas, from the peace process had proven counterproductive. Finding a way to engage with all parties, however difficult, was essential for achieving a sustainable peace. Moreover, promoting people-to-people initiatives and fostering reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians was crucial for building trust and healing the wounds of the past. The 2023 Gaza war was a tragedy for both Israelis and Palestinians, claiming thousands of lives and leaving behind a trail of destruction and despair. Yet, amidst the ruins, there remained a glimmer of hope. The shared desire for peace, the lessons learned from the conflict, and the renewed commitment of the international community offered a faint but persistent ray of light in an otherwise bleak landscape. The path to peace would be long and arduous, but the pursuit of a just and lasting solution remained the only viable option for the sake of both peoples and the future of the region.